There are stories the ocean refuses to let die. The USS Cyclops is one of them. In March 1918, a giant of steel and steam left port and simply never arrived. No distress call, no debris. More than 300 souls gone, swallowed by silence. This is the full human story of the Cyclops, her steel ribs and rivets, her crew and their small daily rituals, her last voyage and the tangled theories that followed. This is written to keep memory alive and to sift evidence honestly from rumor. Launched in 1910 and built as a Proteus-class collier, USS Cyclops was a practical, powerful ship whose entire reason for being was to carry fuel and supplies to the fighting units of an expanding navy. The hull measured roughly 540 feet from stem to stern and presented a squat industrial silhouette on the water. Heavy hatch covers, tall derricks, stout winches, and a broad deck used for loading and discharging. She was not elegant, she was built to perform. For years, she hauled coal, steamed between coaling stations and ports around the Americas, and kept the fleet's boilers fed. When the United States joined the First World War, Cyclops's role shifted. The vessel was assigned to the Naval Overseas Transportation Service and began carrying not only coal, but strategic raw materials. In late 1917 and early 1918, she took aboard manganese ore in Brazil, manganese being a crucial alloy element used to harden steel for munitions. This cargo was denser and behaved differently from coal. It required trimming, careful stowage, and experienced oversight if a ship was to remain stable in heavy seas. That matter of density, simple, physical, stubborn, becomes central to many of the plausible explanations for what followed. To understand a ship's loss, it helps to picture the world inside her. Cyclops's deck and holds were machines in themselves, rows of hatch combings, heavy lids, derricks and booms that climbed and swung under winch power. Below, the crew's world was both intimate and cramped. Hammocks or narrow bunks, a mess that forever smelled of coal smoke and salted meat. Drying oilskins and boots piled where a door banged open to the salt wind. Sailors kept to a rhythm, watch standing, maintenance, and the small economies of seafaring. Where to borrow a tool, which hatch to avoid when wet, which officer to avoid on a bad morning. That daily grind produced its own tensions and loyalties, and on a long voyage, those human dynamics are as decisive as the sea. In March 1918, Cyclops sailed under Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley. Born Johann Friedrich Wichmann in Germany and later known to most as George Worley, his biography before joining the Naval Auxiliary Reserve reads like the sketch of a hardened, itinerant mariner. A youth who jumped ship, years in merchant service, a stint running a saloon, and eventually a master's license that led him back to command at sea. Commissioned into the Naval Auxiliary Reserve in 1917, Worley was widely regarded as a strict, old-school officer who brooked little insubordination. Many contemporaries described him as gruff and sometimes harsh with his men. Later investigations and recollections amplified this picture with specific grievances lodged by sailors who had served under him. Cyclops loaded manganese ore in Brazil, took on stores and crew, and steamed north. It called at Bridgetown, Barbados, arriving and making preparations for the final leg of a voyage that would terminate in Baltimore. According to port logs and eyewitness accounts, she departed Bridgetown on the afternoon of 4 March 1918, bound for Baltimore, and after that departure, she was never seen again. When she failed to arrive on schedule, the Navy mounted an extensive maritime search across the likely corridors between the Caribbean and the Bermudian approaches, but no conclusive wreckage, lifeboats, or bodies were recovered. The loss of Cyclops, more than 300 officers, sailors, and civilian workers, is recorded as one of the largest non-combat losses in U.S. naval history. Witnesses on shore later described ordinary, human scenes that now carry particular weight. Longshoremen straining at chains as ore was bagged and funneled into the holds. Sailors exchanging last letters and packets. The raising of the gangway and the steady rotation of the ship's engines as they steamed back out to sea. Some locals described weather that afternoon as placid and mild, an ordinary March afternoon in the Caribbean, making the vanishing all the more perplexing for people ashore who remembered nothing dramatic. Manganese ore is not coal. It is denser, it compacts differently, and it must be trimmed and secured in ways a collier normally carrying coal might not practice routinely. If the ore is stowed without adequate trimming, creating uneven pockets of mass, the ship's center of gravity can change as soon as the vessel encounters a seaway that pushes or rolls her. A sudden shift of thousands of tons of dense ore can produce an abrupt list. In some circumstances, that list can become unrecoverable, capsizing the vessel before anyone on board can send a signal. Contemporary and later technical analyses note that Cyclops was carrying roughly 10,000 to 11,000 long tons of manganese ore on that voyage, an amount that pushed the practical limits for a ship of her type when carrying that sort of bulk. Records and witness statements from the loading in Brazil and Barbados indicate the stowage may not have had the experienced trimming that ore cargo demands, creating a credible scenario in which shifting cargo precipitated a rapid and final loss. The North Atlantic in early March is weather that does not forgive misfortune. While some witnesses at Bridgetown recalled a calm afternoon, meteorological conditions can change quickly in these latitudes. An ordinary passage can meet a rogue squall that catches a ship poorly trimmed. An underperforming engine or a jammed pump can remove the small but critical seconds that let the crew correct a developing list. The combination of heavy, poorly trimmed cargo and a sudden sea event is a sober, technical account that points toward an unfortunate but essentially terrestrial explanation for the loss. The disappearance occurred in wartime, and war invites suspicion. With German U-boats operating in the Atlantic, the possibility of a hostile torpedo was quickly invoked. Cyclops' cargo, material for the war effort, gave that theory weight on the surface. However, the historical record does not locate a corroborating German claim or war diary entry matching an attack on Cyclops, and no physical evidence, no debris field, no telltale damage consistent with a torpedo strike has been found to support a definitive U-boat sinking. The absence of corroborating enemy records or wreckage does not conclusively exclude hostile action, but it weakens it as the simplest, most likely answer. Beyond weather and enemy action, darker human possibilities circulated early and often. Lieutenant Commander Worley's record as a strict and sometimes abrasive commander made him a focal point for suspicion. Crew petitions and complaints from earlier voyages were on file, and in a cramped, tense atmosphere, such grievances can metastasize. One theory that received attention in the decades after the loss posited sabotage or a botched mutiny. Sailors, driven to a breaking point, could have damaged pumps, altered ballast, or otherwise broken essential systems in a plan that rapidly unraveled into catastrophe. Another variant speculates on deliberate skedaling for insurance or political motives. These theories are dramatic and human, but they rely on actions for which there is no direct documentary or physical proof, only fragments of testimony, rumor, and conjecture. When Cyclops failed to arrive, the Navy threw resources into a search commensurate with the scale of the loss. Cruisers, destroyers, and patrol vessels combed the sea. Pilots in fragile biplanes scanned the horizon. Cable traffic was monitored and ships were questioned. But the technology of the day placed hard limits on what searchers could accomplish. There was no radar. Depth soundings were primitive and painfully slow. Hydrographic charts were incomplete in places, and wireless communication was far less reliable than modern users imagine. In short, the ocean's immensity and the technological limits of 1918 conspired to make an adequate search enormously difficult. A question that haunted investigators then and researchers now is simple. How could a ship of Cyclops' size and weight leave so little floating evidence? Large ships can sink quickly and nearly intact. If that happens in deep water, little may float to the surface. Currents can sweep any debris far from the sinking site. Natural forces, storms, marine life, chemical breakdown, accelerate the disappearance of smaller objects. In wartime, records can be lost or misreported. Combined, these factors can mean that even thorough searches find no easily linked debris. The Cyclops story grows more unnerving when placed in the context of her sister ships. Vessels of similar design, like Proteus and Nereus, also vanished years later while operating in wartime seas and carrying dense cargoes. In each instance, the final outcome left more questions than answers. The pattern of 3 related ships lost under opaque circumstances has fueled speculation about design, cargo handling, and even bad luck concentrated in a ship class operating in a dangerous theater. The repeated disappearances do not prove a single cause, but they invite sober scrutiny of design limitations and operational procedures that may have amplified risk in similar conditions. Beyond technical analysis, the story of Cyclops is first and foremost a human tragedy. For families waiting in ports from lower South America to the eastern seaboard, the loss was a hole in a life. Names appear on naval rosters and memorial tablets, and 1,000 small objects, letters, a seaman's patch, a photograph, become the fragile human traces of those lost. Bureaucracies responded with claims, with insurance paperwork, and with inquiries into manifests. Who oversaw the loading? Who certified the cargo? How was the ship trimmed? Those ledgered questions are prosaic and insufficient to fill the emotional void, but they are the practical ways societies answer catastrophe. As the Cyclops story passed through decades, popular writers folded her into the Bermuda Triangle myth. The triangle is a cultural shorthand that absorbs unsolved maritime mishaps into a single, marketable narrative of the mysterious. That framing sells magazines and fuels documentaries, but it often obscures the tangible technical factors that are likelier to have caused a loss. The triangle is a seductive overlay, not a substitute for archival work and nautical analysis. Its popularity rests in part on the very absence of a clean, official answer. A century later, we have better tools: bathymetric maps, side-scan sonar, magnetometer surveys, and remotely operated vehicles that can scan for a hull on the deepest plains. Archival research, crowdsourced and professional, can narrow search grids, refine estimates of last positions, and model drift and debris fields in ways impossible in 1918. But the Atlantic is vast, the shelf contours complex, and a single 540-foot hull can be astonishingly difficult to locate without a well-focused search plan. Still, the technological possibility of discovery remains, and with careful archival triangulation, an expedition might one day find what the early searches could not. Cyclops's loss is a lesson across domains. Practically, it stresses the dangers of carrying dense bulk cargoes in ships not designed or properly trimmed for them. Institutionally, it highlighted the need for manifest accuracy, skilled stevedoring and oversight, and the perils of assigning a heavy industrial task to crews unfamiliar with a particular commodity. Humanly, it is a reminder of the weight leadership carries aboard a ship. Morale, discipline, and respect between officers and crew matter when seconds make the difference between recovery and catastrophe.
Culturally, the story shows how mysteries attract myth, how absence invites speculation, and how societies oscillate between technical explanation and supernatural shorthand. We may never have a single clean answer to what happened as Cyclops steamed away from Barbados on March 4, 1918. The sea keeps its secrets with a patience hard for humans to accept. But the ship's disappearance is not merely an unsolved puzzle for the curious. It is a ledger of human lives and institutional decisions. Remembering the men who sailed her, and studying the file-name-like details of cargo, trim, weather, and command are both forms of respect. If some future hull is discovered on the floor of the Atlantic and identified as Cyclops, the answer will grant a particular kind of closure. Until then, the ship remains an enduring lesson and a quietly tragic enigma.